What's up, you creepy fucks, and welcome to the Let's Talk Horror Channel podcast. And welcome to the Creep Zone, where we have very honest, unrated, unfiltered conversations about something from the world of horror. Now, this film's going to be another interesting one. I've named this, even though now we're the second episode into November, I've named this sort of November is the 90s nostalgia November. These are movies that, even though I only do 2 episodes a month, they're 2 episodes of movies that you either haven't seen, you don't know about, or you don't give a fuck about. So, and that's how it's going to go. And so this episode is about another movie from the 90s. The previous episode, you would have known, that was from 95. That was Tales from the Crypt Demon Night. And you probably were wondering what the fuck that movie was when that came out, and then decided not to listen to it. But listen, this is previous Brett. Now we're in the future, and I'll find out whether anybody's bothered listening to it now. But anyway, now on this episode, we're going to be talking about another 90s movie. It's difficult to say classic. I mean, I suppose it's classic in the sense that it's old, which is bad because it makes me feel really old.
Yeah. Wait till you hear how old I was when I first watched this.
Oh, okay. Well, let's get into it. So, House on Haunted Hill. It was released. Do you know what? We're not going to get into it. I don't know why I'm even doing this. This is the problem, because I haven't even introduced my guest today. This is fucking hell. Like, this is what I'm saying. It has been. I tell you something. Trying to do this episode and trying to talk about this film is going to be absolutely insane. Everybody's going to think I'm absolutely. I've had a ket party before this or something. I think I've got fucking mental. But basically, on this episode, and to be fair, he's absolutely saved my arse on this because he stepped in sort of last minute to really help me out. And when he sent through his list of movies that I always ask people, I'm like, look, send me through a list of movies and I'll pick one from there. And House on Haunted Hill was on there. And do you know what? I was like, do you know what? Fuck it, let's do that one. Why not? How bad can it be? But we'll find out. But Jay, or as known on Instagram as Lumberjay Reviews, is that right? Did I get that right?
Yeah, you got that all right.
For once, I got it right. And he's also one of the hosts of the Girl and the Gay podcast, which obviously you can find everywhere. But he's going to absolutely promote the absolute shit of it. He's going to do a brilliant job later. Trust me, he's going to do a brilliant job of promoting the podcast later on. I promise you're going to do brilliant.
It's going to be so bad.
But at the end of the episode, obviously, as usual, he's going to promote the shit out of it. But we are going to get right into talking about House on Haunted Hill. Not obviously the original with Vincent Price. It's not that one. We're talking about the one that was released in 1999. It's directed by William Malone. Don't really know who he is. I should have Googled it beforehand. It's starring. Now I'm gonna talk about the cast later. And there's obviously going to be a reason why I'm going to talk about the cast later. I'm going to tell you who's in it now. If for anybody that doesn't know, but I'm going to talk about the cast specifically because this has got like a big cast of essentially people who are nobodies now. But we're going to talk about, but most of them. Yeah, probably. Yeah, that's it. But it's starring Jeffrey Rush, Famke Janssen, which is probably pronounced wrong. It always is. Ali Larter, Ty Diggs, Chris Kattan, Bridget Wilson, and even Jeffrey Combs is in this. And also Spike from Buffy. He pops up in this as well for like 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, literally.
And also recently I got to meet him, and he is a really nice guy.
Oh, no way.
But I didn't speak to him about this movie. I didn't want to upset him. On IMDb, this sits at 5.6 and 31% on Rotten Tomatoes. Normally, I'm like, oh, that's a bit low, but
you're like, that's too high.
That's too high on this one. That needs one of those green splats on this one. I'm already giving away stuff already. Google synopsis-wise, after a millionaire offers a group of diverse people $1 million to spend the night in a haunted house with a horrifying past. That's what Google's put. It's really not written well. The way that I said it is how it's written, so they need to sort that shit out.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's essentially it. They're going to get, if these people, they go to this haunted house, and if they spend if they spend a night there, they get $1 million. It also, I'm pretty sure as well, if like the other people, although I'm assuming that they didn't think they were going to die. But if they left, I think the people get that extra million of the people that left, so they could have essentially got like 5 million, I think, by the end of
Yeah,
it.
that's. I mean, don't get me wrong. This film does have its plot holes,
Yeah,
but that was one of the things that didn't really add up in my mind because it was like, but the way that you sort of explained it is the only way that it makes sense. Is like if they
yeah,
physically was like, nope, too scary, I can't deal with this, and walk out, then they lose it. But yeah,
yeah.
it was the
Not
phrasing of
yeah.
if you die, and it was like, well, by the end, all but two are dead, so that would, like, I don't know.
Well, that's it. I mean, at the start of it, if you're standing there and below, like you've got to make it through the night, and you're standing there going, "Oh, that's probably like I could do that. That's easy." Like I don't believe in ghosts anyway. It's bullshit.
No,
So
same.
easy, easy. It's just a spooky house. And then he's just like, but by making it through, it means you don't die. Then I would be like, oh, okay, I might as well go then because I don't want to die for this.
Yeah,
But obviously all these people are morons, so they do it anyway. Although they haven't really got a choice, to be fair, because of what happens, which obviously we get into. But one of the first things I always ask my guest is, when did you first see The House on Haunted Hill?
oh, for me, this is has a special place. Although people might not like it, I personally love it. But this is my first horror movie that I watched, like first full length, like watched it from start to finish. I saw clips of other films when I was little, but this one was the one I literally sat there behind the sofa. My parents didn't know that I was watching, and I watched the entire thing, and I was only 7 years old.
Oh, okay.
And so, although now you can look at like some of the kills and some of the effects, like the hollowed out face, for example, like that bit petrified me when I was a kid. Like I was literally nightmares for a week with that. But now you look about it like, oh, that's quite funny.
Yeah, like that guy's face has just gone missing somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, so it's literally. I don't know. I was also fascinated by the story of. So this is sort of going into the story actually, but I was fascinated by the story of Vanicut and like how I almost wish we had a prequel as well as how he
Yeah, yeah,
became such a psycho. Basically, I'd have loved that. Like
yeah.
back in the 30s, where it's when it burned down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you were 7. So obviously this shows how old I am because I think when this came out, I was literally double your age. So I was 14 when this came out because I'm really old. And I remember watching this, and I spoke to you obviously a bit before this came on, and I've got a little bit of a sad story as well that I'm going to pop in here as well because it all connects. So I've spoken about this on the show before, but obviously when I was younger, I used to go to Blockbuster all the time, like a lot of us. When you're old like me, Blockbuster was our place to go. It was
it
the
was.
greatest thing in the world, and still to me, to this day, it's something that is such a dear place in my heart. And House on Haunted Hill was one of the movies that I ended up getting. And I think that I got it on X Rental because Blockbuster used to do that bin where it was 3 for 20 when they had the excessive movies that had been out for a while, and they were like, we need to get rid of some of this shit.
Yeah,
So they used to put like a 3 for 20 label on it. And I always remember this movie because on VHS it was a big box and you had a red case, and it was a red case VHS with obviously the inlay on it that was all red as well. So it looked really cool, and that's the reason why I ended up getting it because I was like, well, that looks cool and it's a horror. Of course, I want to watch it.
yeah,
This was in my 40 when I was 14 and so on. So I was just watching every horror I possibly could, shit or good. But what's really sad is that today, as filming this as today, I went down to where the Blockbuster used to be. It used to also be a cinema that's no longer there, and it's a big shopping sort of place now that still has shops, like supermarkets and stuff like that.
yeah,
And sort of in the middle of this was where this big Blockbuster used to be, and really sadly, that driving past it today, for anybody that's watching this. I'll try and, as long as I can figure out how to do it, I'll put up a picture of what I mean. And if you're listening to it, then I suppose you'll sort of shit out of luck for a moment. But if you're listening to it, you'll still get what I mean. And that's basically, I went past it, and that Blockbuster, that this movie that I got from the X rental 3 for 20 bin, unfortunately, has literally today been knocked down. And as I said, if you're watching it, you'll see a picture on your screen of what it looks like now. And it was really sad going past it. Like, it was really emotional because, you know, that was a place that I went. You know, that was a place that I worked as well. And it's sad to see, like, you know, places like this. I mean, to be fair, Blockbuster's gone for ages. I'm surprised they didn't knock it down years ago and fucking put something else there.
Yeah.
But it was sad to see it go, and it was interesting that on this day that it gets knocked down, we're talking about one of the movies that I brought there. And yeah, well, I say I brought there because I think this film was an 18, so I think I had to get my mum to buy it for me in the 3 for 20. But you know, that's life.
Yeah. God, Blockbuster.
So yeah, but those days.
Sorry, Blockbuster was like. For some reason, it was such a good thing to do on a Friday night. You know, you go there, you pick your film, you get your popcorn or whatever, and it had a good vibe for it. And now I kind of, it's good that we've got Netflix and all that kind of stuff, but at the same time, it's not the same as like going.
No, yeah, you're right. It's not. It just it doesn't feel the same, and I don't know whether that's just because, you know, nostalgia is such an ingrained sort of feeling that, like, no matter how old you know, like my daughter now, you know, when she's older, she's going to have nostalgia for the things from her youth and so on. So we now start have nostalgia for those things of our youth. So sometimes we get a bit blinded by nostalgia, but at the same time, you can't, like, when you think of it, it just makes you feel happy. So there's nothing wrong with nostalgia whatsoever. It's like a great thing where, like, we can look back on things like Blockbuster and go, how cool was it that we used to have to go and walk around the shop? And also that was a way that we would find, because this was, you know, way before the internet. So this was how we used to find movies as well. So I would go to the horror section and I would go through it and be like, oh, that's cool. And I'd look at the back of the videos and then I'd be like, wow, that sounds cool. And then I'd write it down. So then I would go home and then I'd go, Mum, can you go and rent this one for me? And then she would go and rent it for me. And then obviously that's how I would watch them.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It was a lot different. But now we spend 2 hours trying to find a movie on Netflix before we actually watch it. And there's nothing fun about that. So even if you were in Blockbuster for 2 hours trying to find a movie, it was still fun.
Yeah.
But now we spend 2 hours getting so fucking angry that we fall asleep and don't watch a movie.
Literally, me and my partner have that issue all the time. We're just like, you know, like doom scrolling on Instagram. It's literally the same just through Netflix. You're just like, no, crap, don't want to see that. And just endless scrolling. It's just, big issue.
It's just constant. And then you come across like your favourite movie and then you're like, yeah, but I've seen that so many times. And then you still skip that as well. And you're like, fuck it, let's go to bed. So we just can't win. But that was as I said, that was the beauty of Blockbuster, that you went there and you left with something every time, and you know, you got your popcorn and stuff. And obviously we grew up like we had no money when we were younger as well, so it just meant that, like, when we went there, it was like a special occasion, and we got the popcorn, and that was like a special thing. And you know, on my birthdays, I would get the VHS tapes and stuff from there, and you know, it was a great time to grow up. But now, because obviously now the accessibility is so easy for people that, like, you get worried about these kids are just going to be the laziest kids that have ever existed because they never get to have to go out anymore. But you know, this is the future. We can't help for anything about that. But yeah, so I did. If I had if I had any emotion, I probably would have cried. But I don't have any emotion, so I didn't. But I felt really bad that Blockbuster was finally gone. So this movie, House on Haunted Hill. It's an interesting one because, like I said, it was a movie that I watched when I was like 14, you know, so 14, 15. And when you said about doing it, obviously I watched it, and I hadn't seen it. Honestly, I don't think I had seen it for 10 plus years. It was one of those movies that I watched a lot when I first got it, and then just didn't watch anymore because there was so many other movies for me to watch. And then I hadn't seen it. And I had gone back to like a lot of the movies that we got around the 90s, obviously, you know, in early 2000s, because obviously in the 90s, I mean, the same year this came out, we had the Blair Witch Project, which obviously completely reinvented the genre, so to speak, in regards to a different style of horror that hadn't really been seen on the mainstream before. In 96, this was at the tail end of Do you know what I mean? This is so interesting because I feel like this film is a weird part. We will get into talking about the movie at some point, but this is a weird part of the history of horror because obviously that's what I'm so like, engrossed by, so to speak, in the genre itself because it changes so often, the different formats and the different way of telling it, that it's insane that where this was at that moment in time, that it was a weird place because what had happened is that like in the early 90s we had the transition from what the 80s horrors were going into the 90s, into the early 90s. Then the absolute insane movie that was Scream came out in 96 that changed horror, and
Yeah.
then it made something like horror fun and fresh and hip again. And I don't think I've said the word hip for like fucking 20 years. But but then what happened is that horror did obviously what horror does best, which is then it came out with I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend and all these ensemble sort of teen sort of movies, that everybody got to a point where you're like, well, now they're just making the same sort of things. So they were constantly looking for the next things. And you had this really small period in the 90s and very early 2000s when there was loads and loads of haunted house horrors. So you had like this, you had 13 Ghosts,
Yeah.
you had The Haunting, came out on the same year as this, which weirdly enough, The Haunting was a 12 and I went and watched it at the cinema, but it has Owen Wilson get decapitated in it. And it was the first time I think I'd ever seen somebody get decapitated in it. And I was just like, Jesus fucking Christ, poor old
Yeah.
Owen Wilson. But yeah, so that came out the same year as this. But then as quick as it started, it went because then we started getting Blair Witch Project and they were like, fuck, like found footage movies and stuff like that. And how can we capitalize on that and stuff. So, and then also very early on in the 2000s in horror, we then started getting the boom of the reboots as well. Of the Texas Chainsaw Massacres and everything like that. And pieces of shit like the Prom Night remake and reboot and stuff like that, which is so fucking laughable. It's unbelievable. So I find like what's funny about this film is that it's the history of where this fits in horror and the horror genre of the history. That's what I find really interesting about this because we had that small moment in time where, and it sort of obviously started coming back when we got the Bly Manor one. I think it's called the one with Mike Flanagan made for Netflix. The Haunting of Bly Manor, I think it was, and that felt very House on Haunted Hill sort of felt very The Haunting and so to speak, like films like that. It sort of had that resurgence, but it sort of came and went like really quickly. And I can sort of see why, because not many of them were very good.
Do you know what? This is interesting you say that because although this is, spoiler alert, this is one of my favourite films, I'm really not...
I feel really fucking bad.
It's fine. I'm really not a fan of ghost films and paranormal films. They bore me very quickly. Like this one and 13 Ghosts are, in my opinion, a lot better. Like stuff, like Amityville Horror is like, ugh, God, no, please. No, just shit like that. It doesn't really. It's like my least favorite genre, like subgenre of horror.
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting about this movie, and we obviously go into it. But what I think is interesting, and also I don't think that this film is really shit. I do want to say that. I don't think it's really shit. I do like this movie, and it has a special place in my heart because of the time when I got it and the memories behind it and stuff. So I don't actually think this is shit. So anybody that's watching this now, and like, I'm not listening or watching anymore because he thinks this film's shit. I don't. I'm going to talk about good bits. I'm going to talk about bad bits. That's what I do on the show. If it's got shit bits, I'll tell you. If it's got good bits, I'll tell you. But one of the things that I do like about this film is that it has a lot of layers to it where it almost is trying to be multiple different films within one film. So it's like almost a bit like a murder mystery.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it then goes and almost forgets about the murder mystery side of it when they're like, oh, actually, no, we're going to make it about ghosts.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So it's almost like you start out the movie where it's almost like a Cluedo. And then it turns into like, oh, actually, it's the fucking darkness. It's this ghost around this house that's doing this shit. And it's quite interesting because I think even though that might overpopulate the movie in regards to like, going, well, what story is it trying to follow? But I think what that does to help the movie, it means that it means that you don't get bored because it's constantly changing its mind, so to speak. That on a story or a structure standpoint, it's stupid. But at the same time, um, but at the same time, it works because you go from this moment where you're like, oh, it's about this, and then it moves into something different. You're like, oh, okay, well now I've almost got like two films in one,
Yeah,
and maybe something else. So I quite like that.
yeah. I think that's sort of. I think it's sort of. What's the word? Oh God. See, I'm not that great with. I'm not very smart, so it'll take me a while.
Well,
But
we you and me both.
right. But it's sort of paying. I'm probably going to butcher this word, but is it homage or homage?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, playing homage. Yeah,
Whatever that word is, to the original, because the original was literally just it was sort of a is it haunted, is it not? But it's all like fake, and it was all like just the couple having this massive bitch fight against each other.
yeah,
But this one does that the same way. You're like, but does it? And is it a could it be thing? But in the end, it's like no, here's a whole mess of crap that you don't really need to see, i.e., the darkness.
yeah. Basically, yeah. Like it basically, as I said, it basically they were like, let's try and recreate a form of what the original was, but then let's turn it into this modern day era of going. Well, ghost films are pretty popular, so let's go like full on that near the end and forget everything else we had started at the start.
Yeah,
but at the same time, as I said, it sort of makes it quite interesting because a bit like 13 Ghosts as well. It's like it feels like there's multiple layers of stories within those movies, and even though it might not like structurally do it like really really well, you're still interested on going, well, where's this gonna go?
yeah,
Because you don't know. It sort of keeps you on your toes quite a bit, this movie. Obviously, if you've seen it, well, the first time you see this movie, you're invested. The second time, you're like, I know where it goes, but who gives a fuck? I'm still going to watch it,
yeah,
and so on. But I think one of the things that's really interesting to start off with, before we get into sort of the nitty gritty of the movie itself, is the cast. And like I said, the cast in this is like, it's interesting because it's actually got a big cast. Not just in regards to how many people there are in it, because there's loads, but this is like a moment, like they got a cast that was like a moment in time in this time
yeah. They
that
did.
was massive.
Yeah.
So you've got Jeffrey Rush, that obviously a lot of people will know as Barbosa from Pirates of the Caribbean,
Yep.
and other things probably.
Mainly that.
Is he? Yeah, probably just that. Famke Janssen. I mean, she's probably the one that sort of carried on more than most of these other ones. I think that she was in. I think she was Liam Neeson's wife in Taken at some point.
Yeah,
and
she was.
I think she was in an X-Man movie. I don't watch the comic book movies, but I think she was in that.
Yeah.
But Ali Larter, she was in the Final Destination movies as well,
Yeah.
or the first one at least, maybe the second one. I can't bloody remember.
I don't think she's in much
Ty
anymore.
Diggs. No, she doesn't do anything much anymore. Ty Diggs, he was in a film with Christian Bale called Equilibrium. Chris Kattan, who's my favourite because I love Chris Kattan. Anybody in the 90s who grew up in the 90s will know Chris Kattan was on Saturday Night Live. He was big on Saturday Night Live. But also he was in a movie that's hilarious called A Night at the Roxbury with Will Ferrell. And it's a comedy and it's hilarious. If you've never seen it or if you don't like Will Ferrell, don't.
I was going to
say, all right with them.
I can't stand Will Ferrell.
Then don't. Yeah, if you don't like Will Ferrell, don't watch it. But Chris Kattan was like a really big comedian in the 90s.
Yeah.
Bridget Wilson will always forever be a crush of mine because she was in Billy Madison.
Oh my god, she was. I forgot about that.
She was like the teacher in Billy Madison.
And I know what you did last summer
and
as
then
well.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, she was. And she was. What was she in? What the fuck was it? And now I've completely. I think she was in Mortal Kombat. I think she played Sonya Blade in Mortal Kombat as well.
Yeah, she did.
And then we've got like some people like I've already mentioned. Well, I don't even know if I did mention, but I think I did. Yeah, Spike from Buffy. He turns up in this for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And then we've got Jeffrey Combs as well. Pops up in this well, obviously from Reanimator, The Frighteners, From Beyond. Jeffrey Combs, absolutely legendary actor. But there's a lot of cast in this. But when you talk about those names, most of the time people now have no fucking idea who they are. And it's weird that like there was a moment in time where all of these people in this movie were like the like the big thing.
Yeah.
Like, and then this, I don't know, maybe it's this movie fucked it all up for them. I don't know.
You're like, this film ruined their careers. I've said it.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's the one where like they always try and leave off their CVs, like when they're
They're
doing it.
like,
They're
I
like,
wasn't in
there's a
that.
gap between, yeah, like you had a gap between like 98 to 2000 and like I don't know 19 where you didn't do anything, and
You
they're
like,
like, oh yeah, yeah. And they were like, weren't you in House on the Haunted Hill? And they're like, no, it wasn't
no,
me. That
that,
was
I've never,
someone
never
else.
heard of it.
No, that's it. But so I find that really interesting about this is that like the cast is almost like a lost like cast. Like
Yeah.
they're not really like it was a bit like a really big ensemble cast. And to be fair, actually, I was going to say they're all pretty good in it. They're actually mostly all fucking awful. But they Chris Kattan is brilliant in this movie.
Yeah.
I love Chris Kattan because I love his sense of humor. It's like he's like fucking like miserable, so to speak, but like he's like very eccentric. And Chris Kattan he can never do wrong, like for movies and stuff for me.
Yeah.
But Ali Lata in this film is really bad.
It's not great.
Like the way that she says the way that she says some of the lines or her reactions to things, it's almost as bad as like Chris Jericho in the new Terrifier movie. It's like that sort of level. Bridget Wilson, I mean, I love her, but at the same time, she's awful. So the cast, Famke Janssen's pretty good. Jeffrey Rush, he's good in this as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I was watching, like, literally just finished watching it before we were recording. I was watching it and I was like, so Pritchett, Chris, I don't know what his name is, Chris, the second one. Him, Famke, whatever her name is, and Jeffrey Rush do carry this film. Like, their characters themselves, for me, if they took them out, this would be boring.
Yeah, they will just like be the generic horror characters that we see in these sort of movies. But yet there's actual like real like Jeffrey Rush is a character actor. Chris Kattan, he's a comedian, so he can be eccentric and he can do all these things. But also like he hits every sort of moment really well. Like when he's like scared, he does that really well.
Yeah.
When he's like pissed off, he does that really well. But there's like you're saying, like there's a lot of like if you took those out of it, you would be stuck with, almost like the Brad Pitt in World War Z, where the only thing he does is stand around like pouting at the camera. That's pretty much what you would get from this movie.
Oh my God.
And it's fine. Brad Pitt can do that. It's Brad Pitt, but also it doesn't really make for a movie.
No.
So yeah, I completely agree with you that if you take away, and obviously like Jeffrey Combs as well, he's not in it much. Sort of the film opens at this mental institution, and Jeffrey Combs is performing the experiment sort of things that he's doing, the nasty things that he's doing in this, as I said, this sort of mental institution. That's where the movie starts, and he sort of pops up throughout the movie. Not necessarily overly explained, and you're like, oh, here he is again, but he just pops up as a ghost, so to speak.
Yeah.
You can probably explain it better than me, but maybe.
What with Jeffrey?
Or he just popped up.
I think he's just. I don't. It's funny because he's much more in the second one than he is this one, admittedly. But I think for me, this Jeffrey Combs in it, he does it. I think he does a brilliant job. It's like one of his.
Yeah.
For me, one of his best scenes is when he's just after the guy's had his face hollowed out. You see like Jeffrey Rush looks to the camera and he's doing this beyond creepy fucking walk, and then like holds his knife, holds the blade that he's just gutted this guy out and just walks off. And it's sort of, I look at it as a sort of similar to Jaws, where it's like the less you see of him, the scarier it is.
Yes. So you're right. Yeah.
That also proves my point to the end, where you're like, you see this fucking great shadow thing with just naked women on it, and I'm like, that ain't scary for me, No. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not.
They basically took it to the places. I'll get into that later anyway, because basically what they did in the 90s, they did a thing where they used technology to the worst examples of it, because it was something, obviously a technology that was sort of getting used more so, and we get into it. So but yeah, obviously you know, it opens in the institution, so on. We get a little thing, and I like the fact that we're like fully into it straight
Yeah.
away. Like when the film opens, like straight away, you've got like the blood, the guts, the gore.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Combs like doing what he does best. And I like that. Like it's almost like a very like relentless start, and you're into it, and it
Yeah.
really gets you into the movie. But then, annoyingly, then it goes into a really shit old school '90s intro where it's trying to be like Seven. Like it's got these like the pictures coming on the wall and the titles and stuff, and it looks really shit. But also you've got Marilyn Manson, who "Sweet Dreams," the
Yes.
cover of that, which is a banging
I
song,
love it.
but it was used in. I swear that there was a contract that it had to be used in every '90s horror movie because it is in like every single fucking horror movie in the '90s.
Yeah.
"Sweet Dreams" by Marilyn Manson. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's even in Bride of Chucky, I think, as well. I think it's like at the start or something, I think, or somewhere like that.
No,
Anyway, but I
that
mean,
that's
oh, is it not?
that's Living Dead Girl by Rob
Yeah, that's
Zombie.
right. You're right. I'm wrong, but it's probably in there somewhere. I don't fucking know. But
Probably.
you're exactly right. It was "Reliving Dead Girl" by Rob Zombie. That's right. But "Sweet Dreams" would just appeared in like so many horror movies that Marilyn Manson was probably raking it in at that point.
Probably. It
He's probably living off that money now.
it does really work though. Like the way that they're reading, like that's a great scene as well for me. The way the sort of each person's individually reading it, and you've got Sweet Dreams playing it,
Yeah.
and they're all in like funeral cars as well. It's just very good.
This film sets it up very well.
Yeah.
Like basically this film is a very good example of when you have someone who goes, okay, like I know the start and I know the end. I sort of know the middle, but I don't know those bits in between.
Yeah.
That's what this film sort of feels like, where it's just like the start, we're going to get going straight away. We're going to set it all up really well. You know, almost like I said, like a Cluedo and a murder mystery sort of thing. But then it gets to the middle where it's a little bit like, oh, okay, well, like this is where you're going now. And then when it gets to the end, it felt like they were like, and we're going to do this big, massive ending, and it's going to be like this, and it's going to be like something that nobody have ever seen before. But then nobody had ever seen it so shit before.
Yeah.
And it was, you know what I mean? So it basically, it started really promising. And then as it goes through it, it sort of gets a bit convoluted, or it sort of forgets what it was and where it's going, because it sort of becomes something different. And that's a shame, because like we've both said, it starts off really well. Especially we get basically a scene where we set up Jeffrey Rush's character as like, you know, this super rich guy who's trying to do these inventive ways to do like new rides and new experiences, almost like escape rooms, but before like escape rooms were like a thing.
Yeah.
And he has that ride with Spike from Buffy on it,
Yeah.
and basically it's I think it's like it's a lift that goes up to the ride, but the lift basically is part of the ride where it pretends to drop.
Yeah.
And basically everybody in it is absolutely shitting themselves, but it's obviously not moved at all. It is actually just going to the top of this ride with this absolutely crazy roller coaster that I would never fucking go on because I'm terrified of them. But I really like that as well. I think that's like a really cool like introduction to a Jeffrey Rush character as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good scene for him, and it's also a good scene for what's her name in the film? Famke Janssen, or
Famke Janssen.
what's her name in the
I can't remember her name.
Evelyn.
Oh, Evelyn, that's it.
So it's a good thing for both of them because it sets up their dynamic immediately. Like
Yes.
they're married, they fucking hate each other, excuse my language.
Yeah.
And you also get his job side of things, which is a big part of it, of like he'll do anything to get a good scare. And let's talk about let me talk about the rides for 2 seconds. Is that not a bit overkill? Like this,
yeah, absolutely.
Like the roller coaster itself is scary to some, so that's fine. But then you're gonna have the other coaster and the other cart in front of you derail in front of you, and then it's going to be fine for you. That's too much. That's too far. Too much.
Yeah. Well, that's movie magic, isn't it? That's like movie where they're like, in a movie we can do whatever we want, and they're like, just so you know, this could never be possible
No.
in real life. And then they're like, but it's not real life, it's a movie. So I'm going to do whatever I fucking want. And that's basically what they do in this movie, where they're like, I'm going to
Very
do whatever
much.
the fuck I want. I'm going to make a roller coaster like derail and scare the shit out of everyone.
Yeah.
And everybody on board is dead from heart attacks, and it's fine.
Because
But yeah,
my mind, every time I see the scene, so they go to they have them following. They show Spike, we're going to call him, and his colleague going around this roller coaster, and you see it from their position as well, and you see the coaster just sort of go whoop off into the distance,
yeah,
and I'm like, where the fuck is that landing?
yeah,
Some poor bastard that's just wanted ice cream is just gonna have like an
yeah,
entire fucking cart land on his head.
yeah. Or some kid in like a sand pit
Yes,
playing,
it's
and
just
then
like
they look up
little
and they're squashed.
sandcastle, bang. Like,
I'm surprised they didn't do that. Actually, that would be such a messed up thing to do. And then, like, it just ends on the mum like screaming. Maybe that's too far. Maybe that's just my twisted mind. Actually, I think.
that's quite funny for me personally. That'd have been funny.
But yeah, but like we said, like it really starts and sets up everything really well. Like you rightly said, like it really sets up the character of Jeffrey Rush and obviously his relationship with Famke Janssen because they hate each other. Although I think that sort of changes obviously throughout the movie. That like obviously we get to a certain point and you know that they're like the hatred is like massive. But I think when it comes to the actual Famke Janssen death scene,
Yeah.
spoilers, but I don't give a fuck. That moment is almost like where there is something there, like a connection where, like, like throughout the whole film, we hadn't had that at all. But there was something there where you're like, okay, there is something there, but it's too fucking late now. They're all dead.
Very much.
But yeah, so I like how it sets it up. And then obviously, we meet the guests and all the cast of this 90s movie. And then that's when things start going properly tits up because all the shutters on the windows and everything's shut. It locks everybody in. And obviously, Famke Janssen thinks that it's Jeffrey Rush. Everybody else starts to think it's part of this game.
Yeah.
That they've got to, obviously survive the night. Jeffrey Rush knows that it's not him. But at the same time, he's then now trying to blame Famke Janssen and so on. And then you're, as somebody that's watching it, I think at the start, obviously, they do a very good job of not like keeping you sort of on your toes of going, well, is it ghosts? Is it then him like taking this extreme situation? And then at the end, is he going to go, by the way,
it was all me.
Nothing was real.
Yeah.
Like it was just, it was me. It was a bloody game.
Well,
and you get that. But then obviously, shit starts going tits up. And that when you start getting the moments where the first person to go is obviously Bridget Wilson, she's the first person to die. That's when you start getting hints of going, oh, okay, like there's more to this. Maybe it's not Jeffrey Rush or Famke Janssen. Then obviously the guy's security guard's face goes missing and it's completely hollowed out. And that's obviously a great, like a practical effect. It looks amazing. I mean, for you at 7 years old, that's like crazy. So you were probably like, shit, his face is gone. But I really like that. And then that's when obviously it starts taking the turn of going, okay, like there's more to this. And there's interesting aspects to it, or like certain characters in it where you're like, oh, okay, like, mate, are they part of it? Are they not part of it? And so on. And you don't know if they're plants or so on. One of the characters we have in it is a doctor, and then he doesn't really say much, so to speak. And you're like, oh, okay. But then obviously he turns out to be something else, a bigger part of the story later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, Famke Janssen is Bridget Wilson's the first one to go. Famke Janssen has a fake death in it. Because what she's doing is that she fake dies because she's basically banging the doctor guy, I'm assuming. And basically she wants to get all this money, which I think is right. I could be wrong. I don't know. I might have passed out at that point. I'm not sure.
So their plan is, her and the doctor, is to basically use her fake death to make it look like he done it, so then someone else will kill him, and then they can turn around and go, okay, well, it was all a joke, but oh no, my husband's dead, I get all the money, because it is mentioned that she had to sign a prenup when they got married. So divorce, she doesn't get shit. But if he was dead,
Yeah,
died, then she gets everything. So
there we go.
yeah,
I knew you'd be able to explain it for me. Good. And but also what I like about that is that it's like it shows that there was the obviously everything. This was all set in stone. This is their plan before they actually knew that it was the house was all fucked up and we had like real ghosts in the house that were doing this to people.
yeah,
Because you get the moments where they're like, well, you must have killed the person. Then they're like, no, you must have done it. And they're like, well, no, I didn't. And then you didn't. And then no one sort of believes each other. So yeah, she sort of fake dies as well. Jeffrey Rush, they put him in this. I think they call it the chamber. I think
the
they call it the
saturation
chamber.
chamber.
Yeah, that's it. And basically, what it is, it's like they put him in it, and it's basically something that will make you go absolutely insane. Where it's just a constant spinning thing that, as it spins so fast, it's revealing things that happen and so on.
Yeah,
But this bit's really weird because the movie goes like really art housey because it's like goes like black and white and
yeah,
it sort of goes into like essentially him going mental because he's in this thing.
yeah.
But it's like a really weird moment in the movie that you're like, hang on, I don't understand what the fuck's happening here.
No, it's I don't know why they put that in there, but it's a choice. So
Yeah,
so for me, like I said, I do really like this film, and I'm not one of these people that are like it's perfect. It's the best. No, it's definitely 100% not perfect. This
yeah,
being one of them, like I get that they wanted to show the effects of this machine that they've put in, and I do find the way they treated people for mental health back in the day really fascinating. Like I don't know why,
yeah.
um, but yeah, I don't know why they done it in black and white. I don't know.
Yeah, it just went like too art housey, where the director was just like, I want to try something really fancy here, and it's going to be like people are going to think I'm a real filmmaker, and
Yeah,
then
you're like,
people that are watching it are like, why have you done that?
yeah, kind of a bit try
And
hard to be honest.
but yeah, so yeah, he's in there, and he basically gets locked in there by this doctor who's obviously banging Famke Janssen
Fucking his
and
wife.
part of this plan. Yeah, that's it. But then she ends up, Famke Janssen actually kills the doctor,
Yep,
and then Jeffrey Rush isn't dead. He ends up coming out.
yep,
But then, yes, that's basically like one of those moments where you think he's actually dead, but psych, obviously he's not because he's got like a bulletproof vest on, I think, and then,
yeah,
yeah, that's it. So yeah, and then at that point, Famke Janssen actually does die, I think, because then this darkness thing, which obviously we'll talk about, this darkness actually kills her, and then that sort of happens, and then that's where the film starts taking this sort of like crazy weird turn where you're like, yeah, yeah, and that's the problem. Because unfortunately, as well, at this point, Chris Kattan, who somehow has survived all the movie, which I genuinely thought he was going to be the first to go.
same.
When I first watched this, I was like, because I knew who Chris Kattan was when I watched this first, like when I was younger, and it was one of those things where I was like, please don't let him go first. But because it's a horror movie, I was like, he's definitely going to be the first to go because obviously he knows more than everyone else. And normally, like in movies, if you're the person that knows more than everyone else, you're going to be the first person to die because now they don't have any help.
No,
Yeah,
so about his death, there's like I don't know if you. So it's to do with me complaining about the darkness and how shit it looks because it doesn't look really shit.
yeah,
But there's like a 2-second clip of when he gets pulled in. He gets pulled into the
yeah,
darkness. It starts to go down the stairs, and it literally looks like women are like reaching out and they're getting pulled down. And then I was like, that looked brilliant. They should have kept it like
yeah.
that. But then it quickly goes to like cardboard cutout going ooh like backwards, and you're like, and ruined it. Like, just
Yeah,
yeah,
it's not good at all. And then, but yeah, so I was really sad Chris Kattan made it that far into the movie. I like you get to a point with his character that, as I said, he's my favorite in it. So you get to a point where you're like, maybe he's going to be the one that, like, funnily, is the one that gets out and gets the money. And quite honestly, obviously spoiler, but I don't care. Obviously, you know, people had seen it. If they're watching this, more than likely they've seen it. If they haven't, then that's on them. But at the end of it, like, you sort of, it would make sense, or it would be better for the movie if he was the survivor, because he's the one that wants out first. And he's the one that is, like, you know, is so reluctant to do it. Everybody doesn't listen to him and all that sort of stuff. And it would just be quite funny for me to be like, he's the comic relief of the movie, so to speak, and he's the one that survives at the end of it. But also at the same time, it's not going to happen, because you've always got to have almost essentially like the heroes of the story are the ones that have got to survive.
Yeah, but it's interesting you saying that, and I never really thought about that. But you're actually right. In I feel like he should have been one to survive, because, like you said, for other reasons as well. Like you said, he doesn't want to. He's in, like, they all go in the door, and he's stood at the door, like, I'm fine here. I don't need to come in. Yeah. He's telling him to hurry the fuck up and pay him because he wants to leave. When shit goes down, he kicks off, and he's like, oh my god, no, he knows what's happening. And he then proceeds to literally tell everyone, word for word, what is going to happen. Like, when Sarah gets lured by a ghost to this bloodbath, basically, and she comes back to the main room, and he goes, oh yeah, that's a ghost, wait until the darkness comes out. And he literally just explains the entire plot of the movie in like 2 minutes, basically. And I think it would have been cool for him to actually get out. So yeah,
and also, like, you know, like from the start of it, he's literally like some guy that doesn't have any money, who's just there, you know, like, and it would just, for me, because he's such like a relief of the movie, like, where you like as I said, like, he's my favorite character in the movie, and he has such an important part in this movie in regards to like getting it from A to B and so on, like that, that it would have just been cool for me for him to be the one that leaves the house and going, I fucking told you, and now I'm the one that gets all the money. And that would have been such a good ending. And also, like, you don't expect it, because it's Chris Kattan, and he's, you know, the person that should have died at the start, and spend all this time, you know, helping them the whole movie for them to obviously all die, and most of them anyway. And then, but yeah, at this point as well, like after Chris Kattan dies, Jeffrey Rush actually does die, because he rushes, no pun intended, in the way to jump in front of Ali Lata, who then the darkness takes him. And then we will talk about the darkness a little bit as well, because obviously I'm with you, it's fucking shit.
It is.
And then Chris Kattan comes back as a ghost and saves the day by pulling this fucking thing. So then it opens the windows and all that sort of stuff. Then and then it just becomes like Casper, the over-friendly ghost.
Yeah,
and then that's it. And then actually, do you know what? I'm going to tell this on here as well. So the reason I said Casper the over-friendly ghost is because I don't know her anymore, so it doesn't matter so much. If I knew her, I probably wouldn't tell it. But I used to work with someone that had one of the funniest dreams that I'd ever heard. And it made me really want to make this cartoon called Casper the Over-Friendly Ghost, because she, on multiple occasions, she had a dream where Casper would come into her room and do things to her. Casper the ghost would come into her room and do things to her, and then as he left, he would turn around and go like that, and then leave out. But apparently he would always leave out the window, even though he could go through walls. And he would always, and this is a legit true story, I probably shouldn't tell it actually, but it's a legit true dream that somebody I used to know used to have. And then I really thought it would be a really funny program, like animated show, if you had like Casper the Over-Friendly Ghost, who was like going into rooms and doing like weird shit to people, and then at the end of it, it's just him going shh like that. Anyway, I digress, but that's why I said Casper the Over-Friendly Ghost. But that's who Chris Kattan basically be. But he saves the day, and then the darkness is gone. And then Ali Lata and Ty Diggs are the last ones left. But also, as far as I'm concerned, in my mind, I'm like, I reckon they're dead, because how the fuck do they get off that ledge? Because it's pretty high up. So unless they got some climbing gear, I don't know. But then obviously they're there at the end waving these checks around because
Yeah.
they're like, we're fucking rich. But obviously, like
How far
I
are you
just
going
at the end
down?
of that, I really wanted something to happen, but nothing happens. Like they just sit there and then it pans out, and you're like, I wanted something to happen where like just like a ghost just came and pushed them off or something like that.
There you go. Um,
Casper comes.
did you see the end credit scene as well?
I don't know if I did actually. What happens in the end credit scene?
So,
I might have. You might have just.
so the end credit scene is of Evelyn and Stephen in essentially the afterlife with all the other people that died, and they're being tortured by the patients, like in the
Okay.
afterlife. But I mean,
So it doesn't end nice for him.
no, definitely not. No,
So Jeffrey Rush is like, I've saved the day. I don't get to go to heaven.
nope.
I just get to tortured all the time. Famke Janssen, yeah, she probably deserves it
She
because
kind
she's
of
not
does.
very nice. Chris Kattan, he's just like, I should have fucking survived this movie, and now I'm getting tortured for the rest of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a bit sad. No, I didn't see that, but it's probably good that I didn't. I would have felt more sad for Chris Kattan, to be fair. But yeah, so that's so like we've mentioned, like there are a lot of layers. There's lots of characters to this movie. Some better than the others.
Yeah.
There's a lot of layers to this movie. Like from it starting off. I mean, obviously, the start is definitely for me like the best part in regards to setting up where it's supposed or should go,
Yeah.
and then we get into whatever all this stuff about the darkness is, which you rightly don't like. So basically, the darkness is an amalgamation, if that's the word, of all these entities, all these people that were part of the hotel and not the hotel, it's not a hotel, it's a fucking shit
Fucked
hotel,
up
but part of
hotel.
this insane asylum. Yeah, exactly. I don't want to stay there.
No.
But part of this like insane mental asylum place thingy. And it's like basically an amalgamation of all of these sort of spirits. Is that right? Is that right?
Yeah, that was what they were going for. But
Yeah, that's what they were going for. Yeah.
that's what they were going for. But they made it of literally just naked women and black smoke. That was literally it. And it was like, okay. And I sort of
Yeah.
I had an idea watching it this time that I was like, I feel like that would have been much better to do. Like, obviously, for me, this screams we spent way too much time on the beginning into the middle. And oh shit, we've
Yeah.
got 20 minutes, not even that, 15 minutes left to wrap up. We need something that's
Yeah.
just going to destroy the place. And
Yeah.
in my mind, I was like, right, you've got this film based in a haunted mental hospital for the criminally insane, and you couldn't think of anything to do. You could have had you could have had the nurses and Dr. Vanica all like collectively come out and just walk after them or chase them, and literally coming out from all different directions and using the different tools that were used on them to take everyone down. Like that would have been, to me, that would have been a better thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's a way better than what we got.
Yeah, yeah, entirely. And it was like, I don't know. It was a huge miss for me. The ending. It's a shame because literally up until she gets thrown through the door to this darkness, for some reason, a door is the only thing that's stopping it. By the way,
Yeah. Yeah. Just the door. Yeah.
because that makes sense. But up until then, it's like brilliant. Like everything's on a high. Like it's all good for me anyway. And then the moment like the darkness starts to come out, I'm like, oh Jesus, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, this is how it's ending. Fabulous. Like,
Yeah, and that's the shame as well because what's cool about this movie is that it's it has a lot when it does like practical effects, it's
yeah,
really good.
yeah,
And that's what I was saying about and like talking about a movie like this that as was at like the tail end of the 90s is what kept on happening, especially in movies like this, and especially in horror, because obviously they're never really like big budget sort of movies. They get a budget, but they're never, like the biggest budget movies,
yeah,
so to speak. And the problem is that CGI is cheap, and in the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, and early 90s, and so on, like practical effects were the thing that you did, but they were like warehouses, and you had people that were creating this thing, and it cost so much money.
yeah,
But then CGI came around and you could make things really cheap. But the problem is that what happened in the 90s, unless it was like, the things that started it, where you like Jurassic Park was like, to this day, you're like, there's loads of CGI in Jurassic Park and it looks fucking phenomenal.
I didn't even
And
know
that
there
was
was
like,
CGI Jurassic Park.
oh yeah, no, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Jurassic Park, the people that created the CGI in Jurassic Park were the people that started basically pioneering the programs that you would use to make
Oh
CGI.
wow.
So they would basically making the dynamics. So the scene where the T-Rex scene, and where it comes out
Yeah.
of the electric fence and that,
Yeah.
most of that's CGI.
Oh wow. That's really good.
So if you go back and watch it, you're like, in that time, I can't remember what time Jurassic Park. I think it was like 93 or something like that.
Yeah, no,
But
great.
Jurassic Park, like, is obviously an example of like, oh, okay, well, that's where the foundations were, and that's where obviously it was supposed to go from, to enhance an experience, but in a cheaper way, and so on. And you could do things that you'd never done before. But the problem is obviously then it got overused because it was cheaper. They started using people who didn't know what they were doing, and then you got films like House on Haunted Hill, where you're like, you could do this practically,
Yeah.
but it costs less money to do it with CGI. But then you create some sort of disgusting monstrosity that is the awful CGI. And what the problem with CGI is that if it's done right and done, sparsely,
Yeah.
or you don't notice that it's CGI, it adds to the enhancement. When it is just purely a monster made of CGI really badly, it takes you completely out of it,
Yeah.
because you're like, now any form of realism, not that this film is a film that's a realistic movie, but it completely takes you out of it. So even though you're watching, potentially a movie that has fantasy elements of it, that it goes too far, it goes beyond it, it goes
Yeah.
to this uncanny valley, so to speak, where you're like, now I'm completely taken out of it, because I'm laughing at it rather than with it in the moments you're meant to, or the moments that I'm supposed to be scared, I'm not scared, I'm laughing, going, look how shit that looks. And
Yeah.
so that was one of the problems, but also that's one of the reasons why these movies, like I said, these sort of haunted house movies in the late sort of 90s, it was so shortly lived, because most of the time critically they were like really panned, and they were like, critically were like, these films are really shit. So horror went from Scream 96 to all the movies that are the same. They were looking for the next thing, and haunted house movies were that sort of next thing, but it didn't quite hit, it didn't quite work. So that's when obviously Blair Witch came with the found footage, and then we got obviously the reboots of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all that sort of stuff very early on in the early sort of 2000s.
Yeah.
And then obviously that lived on way longer than it should have, but it made money.
Yeah.
And though these haunted house sort of movies, didn't really make the money that I think they all thought they would, because also one of the cool things about this is as well, like the set design as well. Back then, obviously the set design was like, especially in these haunted house movies, they were always like 13 Ghosts, like you mentioned as well, and The Haunting as well. Like the CGI in all these movies is shit,
Yep.
but the set design is always like
Amazing.
phenomenal, and that's one of the things about this movie where you're like, oh, okay, like the sets on this look so cool, and that invites you in to the movie as well, because you're like, they're real, and real people obviously put their artistry and made those amazing set designs.
Yeah.
And you're watching that and you're in awe of that, and you're like, oh wow, this is so cool. But then obviously we get taken out of it with Ghost Catan and the shit of the darkness that you rightly, exactly the same as me, it just takes you out of it, and it becomes not the movie that it's set out to be.
No,
which is a shame.
It's a massive shame. It's going on the practical effects. I just think it could have been like, and I'm not going to say like take it from. I'm using it as an example. For example, Silent Hill, the nurses, creepy as fuck, look amazing.
Yeah.
Something similar to that. That was like obviously not with their huge tits out. No one needs to see that. Well, I don't believe. But something like that, or like, because in the sequel they do a lot more of that. There is no darkness, none of that bullshit. They are fully focused on just the patients and them trying to get revenge, etc. So it does, on that sense, the sequel does do it better, but the sequel's not good either. I mean, it's fine, but
Yeah.
the darkness lets it down. There's this, I don't know if you, I didn't the see there's a CGI moment. So after Pritchett's died, they sort of going, oh, he was right after all this time, it's alive, and then like the house sort of turns a hallway into like a jaw, and just sort of like with really
Oh
sharp
yeah,
teeth.
yeah, yeah,
I was like, that doesn't look bad. I was like, it doesn't look
yeah.
bad, to be fair, but yeah, mostly I sort of agree. The CGI is kind of wank. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's a shame as well because, like I said, like it was, and we get it now. Obviously, like CGI, it's overused. Back then, it was overused because it was cheap. Now, we've got to a point where CGI can be really good, but unfortunately, the artists that are creating it aren't given enough time to make it work, and that's the biggest problem with the CGI industry at the moment. Is where you'll have these movies and they're like, by the way, you've got like 2 days to do this,
Yeah.
and you can't do something. So I always feel really bad for CGI artists because if you watch a movie and it looks shit, and then you're like, oh well, they did a fucking shit job, but it's unfortunately not. It's because they haven't been given enough time. Whereas back then, you know, they were probably given more time to do it, but at the same time, they didn't have the right tools to be able to create like what they were wanted, and that's why they should have always gone, like you're saying, with practical effects. Like there is a way that you can create this movie using just practical effects for the darkness rather than going like CGI, because this is like one of those movies, like for example films like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. To me, even though it's a film now 50 years old, for me it's timeless because it's just fear on the highest level. The
Yeah.
problem with films like House on Haunted Hill is that it's not timeless because we sit here now in 2024 laughing at how bad it looks. And that's the problem. Whereas, films like, back in the 70s and obviously early 80s and so on, and, when it was all practical effects, it's real. So
Yeah.
not only did you watch it and then you were like, oh, okay, like not only does that look cool, but it was real. So when Freddy's got syringe fingers and stuff like that in Friday the 13th Dream Warriors and stuff like that, you're like, well, not only is that cool, and it's such a cool, like interesting, unique imagery that we get to see,
Yeah.
but also people made it and you're in awe. Like, as I said, I know I've said this and I said this on the Demon Knight episode, like the reason why Demon Knight is so important to me, because out of all the films that I watched, Demon Knight was one of the movies that, even though like no one's really seen it or talk about it, it was actually a movie that started me on my journey because how obsessed about practical effects I was. And I used to, have all these Fangoria magazines and the Demon Knight magazine, and so practical effects have their place in horror for a reason.
Yeah.
And when we got to a time, unfortunately, where it was overused, it means that these movies like House on Haunted Hill never get respect, because you get like halfway through it and then you're completely taken out of it because they're trying to do things on the cheap, and doing things on the cheap by doing the awful CGI that doesn't stand the test of time. Then you're like, oh, okay, well then it sucks.
It's sort of like The Faculty, like
Yeah,
hear me
yeah,
out, everyone. But throughout the entire film, like it's all very like tension building, like what's going on, who's an alien, who's not, blah blah blah, and then you get the big reveal of who the alien queen is, and you're like, wow, that looks bad.
yeah, yeah. And that's the thing, and I like, I'm like, because I love The Faculty. Oh, obviously, everybody thinks it's a bit different, but The Faculty is a movie that I love. But once again, like that's because it came out in a time when I was, you're impressionable about these sort of movies, and they
Yeah.
always mean like a lot to you and stuff. But I'm with you. That's the problem with these movies, is that they try and create a spectacle, but yeah, they're using the wrong tools to create a spectacle. For example, we know that you can create these monsters using practical effects. The problem is that it costs a lot and it takes a lot of time. Whereas CGI means that you can sit at a computer, even in the 90s, you can have a team of people who just create something and put it in the movie that costs so much less,
Yeah.
and you don't need warehouses to create a giant monster. And then, like you're saying, films like The Faculty, you get to a point where you're like, oh, okay, like when you watch those movies now, you're like, that's a shame that they didn't go a different route. And we get why, but it doesn't help the situation where you're watching it. And like now, 1999 was a long time ago. Hang on, that makes this film what, like 25 years old? Then yeah, is that right?
Yeah.
25
Shit,
years old,
25 years
which is,
old.
that's crazy, and it makes me feel really old. But
Insane.
25 years old now, and it hasn't aged well. Some of it has. The idea, the concept, the story of where they're going. Chris Kattan obviously still makes me laugh all the time. The tension between the Jeffrey Rush and the Famke Janssen, the introduction to it all and the characters works really well.
Yeah.
But the further you go through it, and the less it becomes about creating something like unique that's real, and they create something that isn't unique because it's just shit and takes you out of it. That's a shame. But unfortunately, that's what like happened so often in the 90s, and that's
Yeah.
why I think obviously Blair Witch Project came at the right time, because we were getting these crazy films like this and The Haunting and so on, and then Blair Witch came out and it was like the most real thing that had anybody seen, because everybody thought that it was real.
Yeah.
And it changed horror, and then obviously we went into other things as well. So it's what I yeah the I'm really, it's interesting to talk about movies like House on Haunted Hill, because they were like a very short moment in the history of horror, that
Mm.
films like this, they had their moment, but they aren't necessarily always looked back on. Like I said at the start of this, like this is probably a movie that either people don't know about or don't necessarily care about,
Yeah.
because it was a moment in horror history that is almost either forgotten or people want to forget it, if that makes sense.
Oh my god, yeah. I,
Even though you love this movie.
yeah, it's fine. Don't worry. No, I'm joking. Yeah, no, do you know what? Sort of going on to a different part, if that's okay. One thing I do
Yeah,
want to say about this film is like, it's so uh, Famke Janssen and Jeffrey Rush's characters. I always keep forgetting the names of his character, but
oh, me too. Yeah,
their dialogue and the way they react to each other is, for me, is the one main reason why I love this film, because it's so like
yeah,
their relationship is so fascinating to watch, and like the quippy bits that they throw at each other, like it's so good. And so with the script, like with them, it's like they've gone, right, we need to put all of our attention on them,
yeah,
and then the rest of them, they're like, oh yeah, you get to say this. That it just sort of felt like the rest of them were just sort of left out, because Jeffrey and Famke have got so much brilliant scenes together and brilliant moments, and I don't know, it's very, I don't know, it felt very half-hearted, basically.
You're exactly right. Like they were putting all of their eggs in certain baskets, but
Yeah,
not all of them. And that's not easy to do,
no,
but they didn't really even try with the other things. Like Ali Lara is just like basically the two least interesting
I
characters
was
of
main
this movie
character.
are the ones that survive.
Yeah,
And
literally.
that's what's insane. Like Bridget Wilson's, like at least there's some form of character before
Yeah,
she's the first one to die. Chris Kattan, obviously, I spent the whole episode talking about how much I love
yeah,
Chris Kattan and how he should have been the survivor. And there's a reason, obviously, I've given my reason as to why I think he should have survived.
yeah,
But then the two people are like the hot ones of the movie, where like Ty Diggs, he was big back then,
yeah,
and Ali Larter obviously was like a rising sort of star from Final Destination, and she was like the hot one.
yeah,
And even though obviously Bridget Wilson's the girl for me, but so it sucked that those two were the ones that survived. But once again, like I said, and like you said, like they were putting so many interesting aspects to certain characters, and then obviously they had the right people in those roles to make it their own. But they just almost forgot about all the others.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, talking about Bridget Wilson, even now that you've said that, it does make a lot more sense in the fact of, like, they've put the two least interesting characters, because they are, let's be real, they've put them as the people that survive. Like, even Bridget Wilson, who dies first, and she's only in it for like 20 minutes or something like that. Even her character, from the moment, like, her first bit of dialogue, personally, I relate to so much, is she gets out the car, walks up to Bridget, and just goes, "Is this dump really haunted?" And it, like,
Yeah, yeah,
immediately I'm like, love her. Literally love her. That would be me.
yeah.
That would be me in this film. I'd be like, oh God, is this dump really haunted? Because I don't know. I'm not here for it either way. But,
No,
and she's got sort of, like, she's there for a purpose. She's there for herself. And I don't know. I don't know. I would have been here for her being not a final girl, because that's not realistic, but a little bit further and let Ali Lata's
yeah,
character sort of die first, because
yeah,
she's almost immediately introduced as, like, this is the final girl, by the way, guys, just all watch her.
yes.
So then to kill the final girl off would have been like, oh shit, okay, like, throw a spanner in the works. But
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't even remember like Ty Diggs even talking in this movie. Like I feel like I mean I don't remember. I mean I said this as well. I think I've said this on the episode, but I said this beforehand, and this goes to show sort of like well also my old man brain. But before I think we started on this episode, I literally had to watch the movie. Well, I had to do a speed run of the movie literally 10 minutes before we came and did this, because I watched it on Wednesday, forgot what happened in the movie in its entirety, and now I've written everything down. So I know like what happens in the movie. But yet the things that I remember are obviously the things that you take out of it that go, that's where they should have gone. That's what they should have done. But I literally can't remember anything Ali Lata says. I can't remember anything Ty Diggs says. You know, I can't really remember anything the Doctor says until he gets a bit more interesting. And then the film ends and the most dull people are the ones that survive.
yeah,
And so they basically, they did it wrong. And they could have gone down a route that was actually surprising and more interesting for you, you know, like more memorable for you to go, okay, like at least it was cool that this guy was the person that survived
yeah,
rather than the usual sort of people and so on like that.
yeah,
But anyway, so obviously I always do some production info and facts on it. Obviously, I haven't got many. One thing that I've already mentioned is Marilyn Manson. Marilyn Manson, obviously, his song "Sweet Dreams" is in this song, in this film, and every single film in the 90s. But and he made all his money. But he was randomly Marilyn Manson was actually considered for the role of Doctor. What's his name? Doctor Vannicut.
yeah.
Vannicut, that's right. He was considered for the role of Dr. Vannicut, which would have been mental seeing Marilyn Manson in it.
No.
No, Elizabeth Hurley was considered for the role of Evelyn Stockhard Price. So she was considered of Jeffrey Rush's Mrs. I think, and Cindy Crawford was considered for the role of Melissa. Which I don't know. Is that Bridget Wilson's character? I can't remember. Or is that Ali Lata's? I think that's Bridget Wilson's one, isn't it? So it could have been other people. But I'm sort of, you know, Elizabeth Hurley would have been like, you know, she's in Bedazzled, I suppose to speak.
Yeah.
And so I'm, you know, like we've both mentioned, like you've got certain cast in this that are at the right, you know, in the right casting for the right character. And they, you know, someone like Jeffrey Rush, where he's a character actor, you know that he's going to bring his own abilities to the role and change it in his ways that he wants to. Famke Janssen is always, you know, great at what she does, you know. And then obviously Chris Kattan, they do it. Everybody else is, and Bridget Wilson, when she's in it, is, you know, good. But everybody else sort of, you know, is just a generic horror person that doesn't really need to be. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like just a flat line of like, here we are.
Yeah.
When Jeffrey Rush's character Stephen Price is talking to someone early in the film, you can actually see a Freddy Krueger glove hanging in the background.
Ah, that's cool.
So there's like another nod, but you also, you never know whether that's a nod to Nightmare on Elm Street, but it could also be a nod to Evil Dead, because the Evil Dead also had the Freddy Krueger glove in it as well,
Oh, I didn't know
as a
that.
nod to Nightmare on Elm Street and so on. There's always these nods in little horror movies, so it could be a nod to both of them. It could be a nod to just Nightmare on Elm Street,
Wow.
and then also. So the darkness is seen as a tentacular morphing mass of ghosts. This design was inspired by the visuals of H.P. Lovecraft's novels, and also the Rorschach tests in that you get in psychiatry, which you can see. So like as it's sort of like moving out and so on, it starts to look more like a Rorschach sort of test. So when you like sort of hear that, you see like, oh, okay, like there is some form of inspiration behind it, which is interesting. Like they gave it a, like, they were like, oh, okay, like let's maybe see like if we can try and add this. The problem is that they did it really shit, and that's their fault.
I was literally just going to say, like, yeah, I can see that. It's still a bad idea. It was still done very shit.
Like... Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Sometimes it's good to have a good idea, but it's not good to make it shit. And that's the problem. So very quickly, overall thoughts from you on the movie.
Overall thoughts. So for me, it's sort of, I said before, it's sort of nostalgia based. I am very aware this is not a brilliant movie. I don't know. I love the dialogue. Like apart, like we sort of discussed it already, but apart from the two main characters who survive and the Doctor, everyone for me has memorable lines. Like, the other four, I can go, right, they said this, and I thought that was the way it was delivered great. The acting from from the four that we've already sort of mentioned are brilliant. I am sort of really, I do wish they did a prequel. I really do wish they did something like showing him going from just owning this big mental asylum to completely butchering it and then everything burning. I do wish we had something with that. But it's a shame. And I mean, it is what it is. It's not. It's sort of a film of its time. Like, if you saw it back then, it was like brilliant. You see it now, you're like, ooh. Similar to The Faculty for me.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's this is for The Faculty. This film is film is a product of its time. As I've said throughout all this, like this fit a moment in the horror genre and history of horror where they were doing a lot of these haunted house movies that didn't necessarily hit. I would probably say, like, off the top of my head, 13 Ghosts is probably the better one that they sort of did out of all these sort of ones. I like 13 Ghosts, and I think it's just because there's like a different sort of aspect or a different thing that makes it a bit unique. I mean, there's 13 Ghosts, so you're like, it's interesting to see how they approach the 13 Ghosts, if you get what I mean. That to me quite interesting on its own, and then you add the story around it. But this, like I said, this was weird because it was a moment in time in horror that is almost forgotten and not really talked about so much, which is one of obviously the reasons that I wanted to do this. It meant that I got to go back and revisit a movie that I hadn't watched for 10, 15 years. But it is a movie that I do hold dear to my heart because it reminds me, like you said, nostalgia wise, and as we all talk about nostalgia as well, is a positive thing, and it is a positive thing. But when it's funny when you watch things when you're younger, and like I said, like I watched this when I was 14, 15, and when I watched this movie was like, I was like, this is such a good fucking movie. Like, it's so cool. It's like, and the set design and stuff like that. And it's because at that time we were seeing things that we hadn't really seen before.
Yeah.
And that was what was really interesting with especially horror, because it was always trying new things. That's the thing with horror, and that's what keeps the genre so interesting. And that it's unpredictable with horror because it's constantly changing or constantly trying to create something new for the next wave of what horror is going to be. And we've had that throughout the existence of what horror is, which is what makes it the most exciting genre. And it's always weird that like you have like this block of time, this block of time, and this block of time, and they're all different, but you had the tiniest little block of time where so many horrors that were coming out were these haunted house movies, and they were doing things that you hadn't seen before, but now 25 years later we've seen it all. And then now we're sitting here 25 years later and you're going, unfortunately, they took the wrong routes for it to be something that we can consider like timeless. Like now, when we watch this, for me, when I watch it, I'm like, this is good, but this almost ruins it because of obviously like the darkness side of it. Almost like for me, the darkness, the way that it looks, the concept, the idea doesn't really bother me so much because horror is wild and crazy and unpredictable, and it is what it is, and they sort of do whatever they fuck they want. But the problem is that it's how it's depicted on screen and what we see. You're like, oh, that looks so shit now. And obviously, especially with Ghost Chris Kattan trying to pull this thing, and you're like, fucking hell,
Jesus,
like it looks bad. So it's a shame. It's a shame because when you go back to this, like if you watch films like this, and I will say to people, if you haven't seen House on Haunted House, obviously House on Haunted Hill. That's not a thing, but House on Haunted House.
House on Haunted House.
If you haven't seen House on Haunted Hill, go and watch it because it is of a time, like you rightly said, like it is of a time, and of a time that isn't that horror really hasn't really gone back to try and like explore. And it'd be interesting to see if it ever does, and if we start getting like when horror's done with whatever it's doing now, are we going to go back to this sort of like old school sort of haunted house sort of movies, or did they sort of learn their lesson and go, not only were they critically mostly panned, but they never made as much money as what we wanted. And that time, that little period in time in horror where they were like the thing to do is gone. And if it is that, then it makes these little movies like House on Haunted Hill, it makes these movies in regards to the grand scape of the genre, it actually makes them more important. Because they were like a part of the history of horror that nobody really talks about, you know. No. And that to me is quite interesting. So that's why I sort of, when I saw that list, I was like, let's do House on Haunted Hill because it'd be nice to revisit it. It'd be nice to get nostalgic, but let's see how much it holds up. And it doesn't. But at the same time, there are aspects of it that you're like, that's cool. Yeah. That's a good idea. That's a good performance. It's a shame it didn't do that throughout the rest of the movie. Like as it went on, it lost what it was at the start and tried to be, and became a different movie. Yeah. Like I said at the start, it was like it was trying to be different things and couldn't decide what it was trying to be, whether it was going to be like a murder mystery sort of thing. Is it real? Is it not? And then once it decides that it's not real, then that's when it goes to the depths of like, oh, okay, well now they're telling you it's not real. It's gone fucking mental, and you don't really get it.
Pretty much.
So, yeah, pretty much. That's it. Really quickly, favorite scene in the movie, if you've got one.
I do. So for me, it's got to be the scene with Evelyn and Stephen in the bedroom. It's literally nothing to do with horror. It's none of that. It's literally just them having just a very toxic discussion, and it's both of them kill it with the performance. It's so good. I also love the fact that Stephen Price in this one looks very, very, very similar to Vincent Price in the original, like with the like the tiny moustache, and even like facial wise, he looks very similar. So it's very cool. And
what's insane about that as well, sorry to cut in, but what's insane about that is that even though his name in it is Price, which is quite clearly an obvious, you know, nod to Vincent, which I don't actually like because it's too much. I think that's like too far, because I'm like, oh, okay, like we get it. But if people know that he's named after Vincent Price, they know that Vincent Price was in the original, so you didn't need to do it.
Yeah.
But what I find insane, and I can't remember who it is, but Jeffrey Rush purposely didn't try to look like Vincent Price.
Ah,
I can't remember who it is, but he was trying to look like someone else. And I can't remember who it is, but he was trying to like appear and look like someone else. But when he got there and was on
you're
screen,
like,
he
wow.
looked too much like Vincent Price. And then they were like, oh, okay. And then he was just like, okay, well, let's just go with it now.
Yeah.
So it's funny how he ended up like his intention wasn't to be like Vincent Price, but unfortunately he was just like Vincent Price.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it just looked really good though. But yeah, that was pretty much it. If I had to pick a favorite sort of horror bit, it would probably be Bridget Wilson's death. I would say just more. It
Yeah.
was more like mysterious, like you don't know who done it or what happened. We sort of, but not really. So that was a great scene for me.
Yeah, I really like. It's one that is weird actually because I keep on going back and forth between like when I can remember the movie. I remember like certain bits in it that like then you'll pop out and you're like, oh, that was good. So I really like the scene that you like where we've basically got this like back and forth toxic relationship and the things they're saying and they're so fucking mean to each other and but it's great to watch. It's great to watch, but they're so horrible. And you're like, Jesus, I hope I never get like that with my partner. But they're so horrible. So that's great. And obviously it's completely sold by their great acting.
Yeah.
But I think that my favorite scene is actually just the fake elevator thing.
Okay.
And I think it's just because I don't know. I think it's a really good introduction where it sets up the Jeffrey Rush character really well because he basically is a rich asshole but he also doesn't give a fuck about what he does to people as long as it's getting his name out there of doing, these extreme things that are going to make him money. And I think like as an introduction to a character, it's a really, really good one. But I like the fact that it's just like he is one of those people that's just like not a nice person. Apart from obviously throughout the movie, he sort of gets a bit nicer when he does, save Ali Lata and so to speak. And there's that little moment between him and his wife when they're going to die. Well, she's going to die and so on. So he has these moments of flash of, of a humanizing character, so to speak. But there's something about like that. And then I keep on thinking to myself, what a cool idea that would probably be in real. Like I know we sort of get that in Disneyland with Haunted Mansion where you're on like almost like a room that moves before you go on the ride, but it's not like this fucking thing drops and makes you feel like you're actually going to die, and then by the way you've got to go on a roller coaster afterwards, so you've already had one heart attack before you go and have another one. But I think that is like, I like the setup because I think that's like integral to the character of Jeffrey Rush. It shows you who he is and what he's capable of. But there's just something about it, and it's also quite funny seeing Spike from Buffy absolutely shit himself. That's always quite funny. But I do agree with you as well. The scene between them and their toxic, horrible, nasty relationship and the things they're saying. It's weird because you're sitting there and you're like, not only is this horrible, but it's actually really funny, and you can't help but laugh. It's like,
I was just going to say, like, and this is quite, I don't know if this tells a lot about me as a person, but Evelyn is my favorite character in this, like, hands down, because honestly, the way that she delivers her lines, the things that she says is so funny. And I mean, it's horrible, and it's all mostly aimed at her husband, which he's just as bad, but it's absolutely hilarious. It's brilliant.
And like her opening scene, I think is her in a bathtub, and even then she's like being like a proper like bit of an arsehole, you know what I mean? And the things she's saying, but once again, it sets up their characters, and we don't get that with the other characters who are the ones that survive. So they basically they made the right choices and then continue to create the wrong choices as they went through it. But yeah, so it's a shame because it is a film that is no longer timeless. Like so many movies from in horror, because of it was at a time when technology in movies such as CGI was used in the wrong way, and they thought that it was good and they thought that it would work. And then now, not just obviously this movie, but loads of films around that time, when we watch them now, we're completely taken out of it because it's not practical and it's not real, and we're like, that just looks like shit, to the point that you're like, it's so pixelated you can't make anything out.
Yeah.
um so, and that's a shame, because you then start to always, just like so many other films in horror and films in general, that question of what if, and then the what if it was done this way, and
Yeah.
what if then this film, rather than it being a movie that like people haven't seen or don't know about, or if they do, they might be like me, who hasn't seen it for so long, and then they go back to it and you're like, oh, okay, I mean, it is what it is now. But it might be one of those movies that is more respected or more seen if they'd have taken the different routes. But then hindsight, that's just what it is.
Yeah.
It's that's the movie industry. You make a movie and it is either works or doesn't, and then if it doesn't, then it's forgotten about, and that's just the way that it works.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. No, that's fair. No.
But at the same time, and as I always say, these episodes just like, it's all about having these very like constructive, honest conversations. So if somebody turns around and says to me and says like, do I think House on Haunted Hill is a bad movie? I go, no, I don't think it's a bad movie. I still enjoyed watching it, even though I forgot what happened in it, but I enjoyed watching it. And if I watched it tomorrow and somebody's like, you've got to watch this tomorrow, I'm still watching it and I'll still enjoy it. I'll get nostalgic because of the time that I watched it and when I was a kid. But at the same time, there's still enough to take away from this movie where you go, yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But you've got to talk about the shit stuff. Otherwise you're just basically just saying that every movie is good, and you can't do that.
No, I mean, it's this thing. It's like, for me, like, I'm quite happy to talk about the shit stuff because it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But even with acknowledging that, like, I do, like, for me, it's such a part of my, and this is horrible to say, but it is part of my childhood. This film, and I do, even with all the negative stuff that happened, well, not happens, the shit stuff that was done really badly, I still went out and was like, you know what, I love this film so much that I got a tattoo of.
Oh, really?
I got a tattoo of Dr. Vanica on my arm. Yeah. So
nice.
Oh no, like, it's,
well, I mean, it's like you were saying, like, the thing is that movies like this, like, you saw this obviously when you were 7, wasn't it? Did you say you were 7? Yeah, and obviously I was 14 when I saw this. But when I was 7, my movies are the movies that are like this for you. So like this for you at 7, I had my movies. So when I was 7 and then onwards, like, my earliest movies were films like Alien, Evil Dead, the first Evil Dead movie, Brain Dead, like movies that I should not be watching at that age. But they are the movies that, like, I feel are like part of my soul and part of my blood and so on, like that. And this is always going to happen. Like, your movies that you have at 7 years old are going to be different to somebody else's at 7 years old. And what's cool is that you at 7 years old, that was like, you were in that moment of watching these type of movies, like I've spoken about, in that small space of time in horror, where this was the movie that was your first horror movie. And no matter how it is now, or how tightly, how people might think about it now, to you, this is like your Evil Dead to me.
Yeah.
And that's what's really cool about horror, is that no matter. And that feels, I mean, that's a fucking brilliant segue into my bloody, I haven't done a bloody segue better than that, I tell you. But but that's the thing, like, it just makes us like, reminisce about those moments. And it's really cool. This is why horror is so good, because it doesn't matter what age you are when you first start watching it. It's the impact of that first movie that has on you that makes you want to continue your journey. And I love knowing that House on Haunted Hill is one of those movies. Well, it is the movie that sort of started you on your journey.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, that's so cool to know that, like, your journey started with House on Haunted Hill,
Yeah.
and I love that. And that's such a cool thing to have because, like I said, like this is a moment in horror that is mostly sort of forgotten, but because it's mostly forgotten, it makes it a little bit more important, and that's cool. So, you know, there's a nice thing that I said about it.
Finally.
So, but as I said, that's a brilliant segue into the segment Your First Time. Your First Time, if you don't know, I hope you do by now, but if you don't, that is a segment where I go out there and basically people on our social medias, they send me a DM detailing their first horror movie memory. Now, I don't have to ask you, Jay, because you've already said it.
Yep.
So that's nice. But this one was sent to me by projectile underscore varmint. That's on Instagram. So you can go and follow me, say, on projectile underscore varmint. They also go and check out her podcast called Nobodies. She has a podcast to say called Nobodies. I was actually a guest on it. I don't know if that episode's out or when it comes out, but I was a guest on it. And she sent me over this memory. So we've got, I remember watching Phantasm with my father in a room we called the Den. He turned the lights low and the sound high, and I remember squealing through the entire movie. After the movie was over, I had to walk by our downstairs bathroom with this huge old mirror hung right in the doorway. I ran by the mirror so fast that night on the way to bed. I couldn't walk past that mirror if the lights were off for at least a year. I've been afraid of seeing something behind me in the mirror ever since.
Wow.
So yeah, and that's it. And that's like, you know, like I've already mentioned with yourself and so on, like these moments, the reason I do this is quite honestly, I mean, it's quite selfish reasons because I've spoken my whole life, being a lifelong fan of horror. I've spoken my whole life to people about horror and trying to spread the word, and being able to be in you know, do this now, you know, in 2024, where I get to, you know, speak to people and learn about their first experiences. That to me, like, I love it. You know, like I've already said, I don't make this just for content. I never fucking will do that, and I won't ever do that. What I do is I try and enjoy this and try and like get things that I want and hope that when I share them onto other people, it's what they want to hear as well.
Yeah.
And there's nothing cooler than knowing, like yourself, knowing that there's someone's first journey always starts, and they're pretty much always different. And I love that every single story that I get sent through, there's just some difference to them, and a different movie, or even if it's the same movie, like Nightmare on Elm Street comes up a lot, but everyone is different, and that's so cool because it's just I get a little glimpse into knowing what started people on their journey.
Yeah.
And I love that. So anybody that's watching this or listening to this, if you haven't yet sent me over your first time horror movie memory, just go onto any of the social media platforms, drop me a DM, and just, you know, put it in detail like this one, and just say, look, this is my first time horror movie memory, and I'll read it out on an episode. And then I get to enjoy reading it, and then I get to share it on with all this other amazing horror community. But Jay, now is your time, probably the time that you've probably least been excited about.
Yeah.
It's your time to promote anything that you want to promote.
Oh God. Okay, fine. I'll try. Yeah. So obviously, as you've said before, I'm a co-host of The Girl and the Gay. You can probably guess which one I am. But we don't just do horror there. We do literally all different genres of film. We even go into TV shows as well. We've done Sense8, for those of you who have seen that. We do just coming up to a year now, I think, by the time this comes out. Yeah, it's about a year podcasting. So we've got our anniversary episode coming out, and we're going to have just a small little announcement on that. So yeah, you can find us there on Instagram.
Exciting.
You'll say?
It's exciting. A year already.
I know.
Blimey.
It's gone very quickly. Very quickly.
Yeah. Well, when this episode comes out, so this will be November, this will be 4 years of doing Let's Talk Horror, which is insane. And it feels like 20 odd years, which is mental. But yeah, so obviously, make sure you go and check out everything that Jay does, obviously on his Instagram page and everything as well, his Lumberjay reviews. Make sure that you head over to any podcast platform, because then you can go and listen to the Girl and the Gay podcast as well. Make sure you do, because it's another, what's great about having these conversations with people like Jay, Becky, like everyone as well, and all the people I get to, is that one thing that we've all got in similarity is the fact that, like, we truly love what we're talking about, and that is foremost over the fact that we're making something. And that's what's great. Like, we don't just turn around and go, or like, I mean, I know a lot of people out there do, and unfortunately that's the way it is, but I never went, I want to make a podcast and so on like that. It's like, I want to have conversations about horror. And at the start of it, it was conversations with myself, because it was just solo episodes. Yeah. But then when I started having guests, which I never thought, it became a conversation. And that is why, I want to do it. And that's why people like yourself and want to do it with your co-host, and that is that you are foremost, you're having a conversation about something that you love. And whatever topic that is, or it might be something that you hate, but you're still going to have the very honest conversations like we've done on this. This has been a very, very honest conversation about something from horror. And that's why it's really important that people out there go and listen and support what you guys are doing as well with the Girl and the Gay, and then obviously your Instagram as well. Because it all comes from the heart, it all comes from the truth, whether it's for good, whether it's for bad. So everybody out there, like I always say, go and support everybody's journey if you can, because we all want to be on this journey, but you all play the biggest part. Simple as that, really.
Yeah, entirely.
Yeah, that's it. Well, there we go. So the only last thing that I've just got to do as well is that I always do is that I have a shout out to my Patreon creepazoids. They are they go above and beyond to help me and support the show on Patreon. And that is Flicks and Friends podcast, Jamie Burns, aka the Disco Doctor of Death, Rob Miller, and Leighton Collins. They are my honorary creepazoids on Patreon. If you want to know more, head over to patreon.com, search for the Let's Talk Horror channel. You'll find out everything there. You get the exclusives. I've said it before, but we have obviously things have been absolutely mental at the moment with all these platform changes and stuff, but I will be getting back to what I call the Creep's Choice episodes, which is where exclusive to Patreon, they choose basically we're going down alphabetical order with my creepazoids, and they're going to choose me an episode, a movie to watch, and then I do a short little podcast episode about it. The first one I did was Nightbreed, and it was a film that I thought had a lot of problems. So, and I think whoever chose it, I think it was Flicks and Friends, I think they really liked that film. So hopefully I didn't offend them too much. But we will, but that's the way that it is. Like when they choose these films, I'm still going to be as honest as I possibly can about them. So if they choose me shit movies, I'm going to tell them it's shit. But you can find out more on patreon.com about that as well. But in the meantime, whether you're watching this, it means the world to me. Whether you're listening to this, it still means the world to me. Help me keep going on this journey through horror. Help Jay and everything that he does on his journey. Thank you so much, Jay, for coming on to the Let's Talk Horror channel, coming into the Creep Zone and basically saving my ass and helping me get an episode out for this what I'm calling now the 90s nostalgia November.
Yeah, I'm very pleased to be asked on as well. I'm quite happy. So I had a great time here. Even if you did tear apart one of my favourite films, but it's fine. I'll forgive you.
Yeah, listen, I feel very bad about it, but at the same time, like I said to you, my brain is a very slow one, and my mouth moves a lot quicker. So I'll probably, in about half an hour, I will feel worse than what I do already. So, but like I said to you, it's very, very cool that this is a movie that started you on your journey, in that little moment, that little piece of horror history that was very short-lived, and that was not only it was short-lived in regards to the scheme of history of horror, but it still lives on with you, so much so that you got a tattoo of it and you absolutely bloody love it. And look, that's nothing to be ashamed of in my bloody book at all. So that's such a cool thing to have. And like I said, the movies that start us on our own journeys is really really interesting, and it's really inspiring, and that's what horror is. And that's why I absolutely bloody love it. So thank you once again, Jay, for coming on the show. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay creepy, fuckers.